My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Also joining me is John Loffi, who may ask a few questions today as well. Today is Tuesday, November 11th, and we're in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, interviewing Bob Lemon as part of the O State Stories Oral History Project. Thank you for joining me today, Bob.
Well, thank you, and John, and
Denise.
Oh gracious, what's her first name? I know it.
Denise.
What?
Denise?
Denise.
Mm-hmm.
And her beautiful jacket on. Now that is a touch of class.
Absolutely. We have Denise with the OSU Foundation with us as well. And also we may hear your daughter chiming in a little bit as well, Robin, today.
Well, I should tell you that Robin, she makes life for me possible. And that's the truth. She does. When you get to be an old devil, why, you just need a lot of help sometimes. And Robin, and she, one point in her young life, she was a pilot. She soloed and got a few hours in, and then for some unknown reason, she just decided to quit flying. Stick to the ground and or the oceans or somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's begin by learning a little bit more about you. Could you tell me the year you were born and where you were born?
I was born on the 3rd day of January in 1929 in Shattuck, Oklahoma. Shattuck, Oklahoma is just about straight west of here, about probably 200 miles.
And can you tell me a little bit about your parents?
My parents, yes, my father was a native Oklahoman. He was, his parents had a small acreage up at Nash, Oklahoma. That's in either Garfield or Grant County, and it's from Oklahoma. Well, I can't remember where it is from Oklahoma City, but from Stillwater, it's 30 miles or so, I think, northwest. And when he finished high school, that would have been in 1921. He was born in the year 1903, and at the age of 18, he finished high school. And one of his high school classmates and my father drove a herd of cattle from Nash. These two high school students drove those cattle west to just a small acreage a few miles northeast of the town of Booker, Texas. And Booker, Texas was where I grew up and finished high school and lived all my life. But the reason we landed in Booker, Texas was because they drove those cattle there to put them on a place. Now, my mother was a young woman. She was the oldest of 6 children. And her last name was Talifero. And just earlier, when was it we had the young woman named Talifero here?
Mm-hmm. Last week.
Just last week. Kim Talifero with a large bank down in Tyler, Texas. And she and a couple of bankers had come up to talk to not Mary Lou, but to Robin and me. My mother was born south of Booker, Texas on a ranch. And she was the oldest of 6 children. and her mother died in the flu epidemic of 1918, I think. And so she found herself as she was 12. She was the oldest of 6 children, and she never went to school another day in her life. She stayed at home and helped her father. His name was D.D. Talafaro, and they just tried to look after a small group of cattle there on a small, they had about 2 sections of grassland, I think. And she, although she never went to school, she became an amazing woman. And she lived, both of my parents lived to be 84 years old, and they lived all of their lives there in Booker, Texas, and they lived there all of their life. Mm-hmm. Mother, when I was 5 years old, why, somehow my mother developed the ability to train high school speakers. And these were people who would take part in your literary contests once a year, and they would do declamations and debate and so forth. And one year when I was about 5, why, I got to where I liked to just be in the house when she'd have high school students, and she would help train them so they could give a better debate or say a better declamation. And one year, one of the declamations that they, several of them worked on, I think, was entitled A Plea for Prohibition. And so I heard that so many times that I got to where I could speak it. And I might have been 6 years old, because it was in the spring, and I wouldn't have started school till September anyway, and I was either 5 or 6, but Mother thought I knew that piece well enough, so when the high school students put on a play there that spring, why, in between the first and second acts, why, you had a few minutes there when they'd pull the curtain down and they got ready for the next act. Why, Mother told the superintendent that if they wanted to fill in there, why, I could get up and give a plea for prohibition. So he was delighted, and of course this was a very small town. There's about 300 people lived there at the time, and they all knew Mother, and they knew my father real well. And so she got me up on the stage, and she got back to the back of the auditorium, and we had this system worked out where if I needed to be speaking louder, she'd go like this. And if I was speaking too loud, and she'd come down like this. And then she had a few other signals. Now, am I taking too long?
No, you're fine.
He said, still okay, okay. Well, I started through this, and boy, I was rattling it out there, and this auditorium was packed. And everybody there, I doubt that many of them knew me, but they all knew Mother. And so I got about halfway through this declamation, and I forgot. Suddenly I gone over this thing at home probably 100 times, but I think it was the crowd and the atmosphere and everything, but for some reason I just forgot. I couldn't think of the next. So Mother started, came down about halfway and tried to cup her, do like this and say the next line. She knew if she could get me started again, why I'd probably finish. Well, I just couldn't quite hear her, and I could remember I kind of walked over to the front of the stage there, and Mother, she kept trying to tell me what it was, and so she came on down more, and she was almost down there, and by this time the crowd was kind of, what would you call it, kind of in a little chuckle, laughing at the distress we were in, and all of a sudden I just knew that our act was failing, and so all I could think of, I could remember this like it was yesterday. I just kind of kicked my foot out there and I said, "Oh, you old heifer." Well, that brought the house down. I think I got a standing ovation right there. And they just died laughing, and of course by that time, boy, it was time for the next act in the play, so Mother walked up on the stage and helped me get off. We got out.
Do you still remember it?
Ma'am?
Can you still say the plea for?
No.
Because that would be something.
I can't, but I could at that time, except on rare occasions I forgot.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about the house where you grew up in.
It was a very small home over on the east side of Booker, Texas, and it was a very small home, and it was just a one bedroom, and I forget where I slept, but when I had a younger brother who was also he was my best friend. He was 4 years younger. He went to OSU, and he was just a great guy. And he died in an airplane crash in 1986. But his name was Glenn Edward Lemon. And I think it seemed like to me he had something to do with the college. When he was in college, he kind of majored in journalism, and but he was a better OSU booster than I ever was. He was just a great guy. Well, when he came along, why, we had to add a bedroom for us, and so they built onto this house, and it was still a small house, but it now had 2 bedrooms, and Glenn and I, we were in one of them, and the folks were in the other one. We still had 1 bathroom, and it still had a old-fashioned electric heater in it. And when you wanted hot water, why, you'd turn the switch down here, and it'd take it about 40 minutes, and you'd have it hot enough to get a hot shower or something.
Well, you grew up during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. Did you know as a young man that these things were going on?
No, I did not. But in answer to your first question, I knew them both very well. In '29, of course, I think it was October of '29 when the stock market crashed, and my father had a good job in the real small town of Booker, Texas. had 2 lumber yards, and it wasn't large enough to support one, I don't think. But in the Panhandle Lumber Company, why, Dad he managed the Panhandle Lumber Company, and we were getting along pretty well. And then October came and the stock market crashed, and first thing you know, he didn't have a job. And so that was kind of that way for a while. He did anything you could do for a salary, for some money to live on. And by the time Glenn came along in 33, why, the Dust Bowl was going full bore, you might say, and we had the double whammy out there. We had the Depression and the Dust Bowl. And I could take you to Booker, Texas today and show you where I was standing when on a Sunday afternoon, and I think it was on Palm Sunday, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was out playing in the yard, and Glenn was outside, and my mother looked out the back door and said, "Robert, where's Glenn?" And I looked around and couldn't find him. And I remember that as the most terrifying thing in my life, because I now only looked for him probably just a minute or two, but it seemed like an eternity when I found him in a little bit, and he was on a tricycle, and he was riding around. This would have been in about 1935, I think, maybe 36. And all of a sudden, he and I both became aware of this huge cloud of dust that was just slowly rolling in from the north. And by the time we got to the house, I had got both in, and it was a warm day, because I remember he had I don't remember what we called them. It wasn't coveralls, but it might have been called unionalls. Just had legs down to about here, and he didn't have a shirt on, and just had he had a strap over each shoulder, and it hooked right here then, and that was getting inside, and that was Black Sunday. Mm-hmm. That's people who are familiar with the Dust Bowl. Well, they'll remember Black Sunday, because all of a sudden, it was so bad. Somehow there was so much electricity in the air. While we didn't have lights in our house, so it was, and you couldn't see anything. And I remember I put my hand right here in front of my face, and I couldn't see it, but when I hit my nose, I could feel it. And that was Black Sunday. And one other part about Black Sunday, that it got so bad there in those years, and we were just about 40 miles southeast of Hooker, Oklahoma. Booker, Texas, Hooker, Oklahoma. Used to get the mail mixed up a lot in there. And well, let's see here. I was going to tell you about the rabbits. It got so bad, there just wasn't anything for even wild animals to eat. In our area, there we lived 3 miles south of the Oklahoma Panhandle south boundary, there in the northeast corner of the Texas Panhandle. And the rabbits came down, they would say, from the mountains, and they'd work on what little grass there might be. There wasn't enough grass for the cattle, and but still those rabbits would nibble on grass there, and finally what people remained in that area at that time decided they had to do something, so they started the rabbit drive. And the first rabbit drive they did, they rounded up several rabbits, and the men all had guns, and they'd kill them. Well, they didn't kill any people, but they decided that was dangerous, and so they wanted to have another one. And so this would have happened there in the Oklahoma Panhandle, probably southwest of Beaver, or southeast of, southwest of Beaver. It'd be in Beaver County, I'm pretty sure. That's one of those Panhandle counties. You have Beaver, Texas, that's Guyman, and then Cimarron County, I believe.
Did you participate in any of the rabbit drives with the clubbing?
One. The rabbit drives, you just had enough men, and once in a while a rabbit would get through and get away, but generally speaking, you just round up rabbits. And there must have been, I don't remember whether it was 20 farmers and ranchers or 100. It seemed like to me they outnumbered the rabbits, but anyhow, they just were in a large circle here, and they'd keep coming in. They all had some kind of a wooden club, and they just herd the rabbits in, and they finally got enough, just got them rounded up here, that they kind of closed their ranks here and got a smaller cell, and the rabbits would just kind of hover there. They probably didn't know what to do either, but they just hit them in the head, and so you had a lot of you had some dead rabbits, a lot of wounded rabbits, and the thing that I remember most vividly is that those rabbits, when they'd hit them in the head or hit them somewhere else and just beat them, why, they'd just cry like a baby. And that sort of shook me up. I can remember telling my father that I didn't want to go on any more rabbit drives. That was my last one. And so that was one of the big, another casualty of the Dust Bowl.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your early schooling. Tell me about going to school as a young man.
Well, I went to I went to school. I started to school at Booker, Texas, and that's where I graduated.
Were they big schools, small schools?
I might even call this a minute school. In my high school graduating class, there were, I believe, 21 of us. And going to school there, my parents always insisted that my brother and I bring home books every night, and we study every night. And we made good grades, both of us. In fact, I was, when I graduated, I was a valedictorian of my class, and you know, that's a big deal. And I didn't have to write my own valedictory address. I was handed one, and I just, by that time I was a little better at remembering things, but I think I gave that without looking at it.
Well, how would you get to school as a young man, as a little boy?
I walked.
You walked. How far did you walk?
Well, it would have been about, it'd take us, I'd say it was from over in the east part of Booker. It was most of a mile, I imagine. And Glenn and I, we always walked together. And we, in my first grade, I forget, it was smaller, probably 10 students. By this time, you must remember that with the Dust Bowl, I started to school in 1936. I would have been 7. And well, for the first 4 years, I walked by myself. I'd come home for lunch every day, and we'd have, we just nearly always had pinto beans. You could buy them, you could buy a 100-pound bag of pinto beans for $3. And that was what we'd eat most of the time. And let's see, I don't know how I got to tell you about that. But
that's okay, I was going to ask you about that.
But we always, we never, in Booker, we didn't have a gymnasium while I was in school. And we did have a concrete tennis court. One concrete tennis court and 2 tennis courts just on ground. And of course, when it rained, you didn't play tennis over there. You could still maybe play on the concrete one. It seldom rained, incidentally. That was another big deal. But anyway, sports, I played football. We played 6-man football. We played, there were, in Lipscomb County, there were 5 schools in Lipscomb County. They were all about the same size, just small little wide places in the road, nearly. And we played football, and we played basketball. We had a basketball goal set up on each end of this tennis court, this concrete tennis court, and we'd play basketball. Sometimes on windy days, why, you learned if you took a long shot, you had to kind of allow for the wind.
Were there any subjects you felt drawn to during schooling?
Well, yes, storytelling. My mother always, we did storytelling, and we did in the county meet each year. Why, I'd usually represent Booker and for my class, and I'd tell a story, and I never won it. I did that for about 3 or 4 years in the grade school, and I never could win it. I might win 2nd or 3rd, no 1st.
Well, you did pretty well in school to become valedictorian.
Well, yes, I did. I had good grades all the way.
And did you work during the same time as going to school?
Oh, yes. I I worked on Friday evenings and all day Saturday. I worked for people, a family that was very close friends. They ran a grocery store, Lehman's Store, down on Main Street in Booker, Texas. And I was working there when we didn't even have paved roads in Booker, Texas. Few of them, we had some gravel scattered that you could get around, but a lot of times you just couldn't get around. But anyway, now let's see, you had asked me.
Job. So you're telling me about working in the
Yes.
grocery store.
I made 50 cents. I worked Friday evening after school and all day Saturday. I'd get home about 8 or 9 o'clock Saturday evening.
What would you do in the grocery store?
Oh my goodness. First thing I got there on Friday, I got the sacks of potatoes ready. And I'd fill those brown sacks of potatoes, and they'd hold about 15 pounds. And then I'd also on Saturday, the farmers would come in, and we never handled cream or milk, but we handled eggs. And I got to where I could just about pick up 4 eggs. Well, not quite. I'd break one once in a while. But I'd put those eggs in. You had a box here, and it was about this long, I think, and it had a middle in it, and then on each side it had a little, I forget what we call them, but things you put in there, and you could put 6 eggs here and 6 eggs this way, and that's 3 dozen eggs. And then we'd put something on top of it to protect it, and we'd put 36 more eggs, and you do that, seems like about 6 times. And then you'd have a box full of eggs here, and we'd get those. We always had to have those boxes ready and completed, because the truck would come by and pick them up Saturday evening, and they'd take them in and get them cold somewhere and sell them back to us for a lot more than we gave. These people, I don't ever remember paying out money for their eggs, but we'd always give them credit on their bill that day. And then I also got to where I could help the customers that came in the store. Back behind, well, they'd have a desk here for customers to stand while right behind where there's this stack of canned goods. And they'd tell you they wanted a can of beans or peas, or you reach over there and get a number 2 can or a number 2.5 can. And the 2.5 was about twice as large as the number 2 can. And of course it sold for more money, and you know.
Well, you studied a lot and you worked when you were in high school. Did you do anything for fun?
Oh yes, every day was fun.
Your horses. You rode your horses.
Oh yes, Glenn and I, we by the time we were, and this would have been in the very late 30s. Why, we always had horses because Father always ran cattle. He learned that we could go to a sale in Beaver, Oklahoma, 28 miles straight north of Booker, Texas, and you could buy small calves that had just been weaned, that had been taken off their mamas, and you could buy them very cheap, and he would just buy so many. And for the first, when I was going up there with him, we'd take just a horse trailer, and you could put about 6 of those calves in it, and sometimes we'd make 2 or 3 trips, and in later years we'd just have a larger truck. Some neighbor who kind of made a living out of hauling livestock on situations like that. But that was one thing we did that was fun. I can remember when I first started going to Beaver with my father, why he'd give me, I think it was either 15 cents or a quarter, and that would buy a hamburger. And for me to go with him to the sale at Beaver, Oklahoma, and buy a hamburger and have lunch, now that was a big deal.
Did Booker have a movie house? A theater?
Not in the years that I was there. We had to go to a movie. Went to Perryton. It was the only one. Perryton was where my wife and I and all of our children lived for a half century while I practiced law. But we'll come to that later, I guess.
Yep.
Now, what did you ask me there?
Oh, I asked you about the theater growing up.
Oh,
in Perryton.
Yes. Many a time when I was in high school, why that was to be the recreation for the week. Mary Lou and I would drive. She at that time she lived southeast of Booker, about 8 miles, and so I'd go on Sunday. Well, we went to the same church. When I was growing up, we went to the First Christian Church in Booker, and her parents, they had just moved to that area. Her father worked for the Phillips Pipeline Company, and he had a good job, and they lived in a camp there. Phillips had these camps about every 40 or 50 miles, and the people who worked at that station, I believe they called it, why they could live for nothing in these small houses, and that's where Mary Lou and her parents and she had an older brother, that's where they lived. And so they'd come in for church on Sunday, and then she and I would just go on over to Perryton and go to the movie. That was sort of the standard social activities for the week.
Well, we'll talk more about her in a little bit, but I want to know how you decided to go to Oklahoma A&M.
Well, that was its name when I went there, and I'll tell you why that was. The only place that we ever visited out of Perryton was Enid, Oklahoma. And that was because my father, having grown up at Nash, Oklahoma, up there northwest of Enid, a little ways, why he had some friends, the Cummings family, and the Humphrey family. The Cummings family, they had 3 sons. They were all older than me, and the Humphreys, they had 2 sons, one older and one my age. Jim was older and Bill was the young Bill Humphrey. And all of those 5 fellas, I'd see them from time to time, and they became very close friends. And I just loved to make that trip to Enid occasionally, and we'd always stay 3 nights, well, not always, but usually we'd stay 3 nights. My mother used to say, "You never want to wear out your welcome, boys." And we'd stay 1 night with the Humphreys, 1 night with the Cummings, and 1 night with, my Uncle Bob. My father had an uncle named Robert A. Lemon, who was a fairly well-to-do businessman. He lived there in Enid at 1917 West Broadway. That house still there, and but all the time I was growing up, why, that's where Uncle Bob lived. And by that time, he had bought, in fact, he owned this tract of land where Dad and his friend had driven the cattle. And he owned a little other land. In fact, he owned a few sections in Lipscomb and Ochiltree counties. And so we would stay with Uncle Bob. And he had a parrot in his house there, and they always would say that this parrot would say, "Polly wants a cracker." I think that was the line. And sometimes it would kind of talk to you. I never did get it quite that clear, but we'd stay a night there. If we had to stay over for some reason, why, we might stay 2 nights with Uncle Bob.
So you visited Enid. Did you come to Stillwater at all?
My first trip to Stillwater, Oklahoma was the day that my parents drove me, well, these 5 young men that I was telling you about, the Cummings and the Humphreys, they all stayed at an address of 913 College Avenue. Right there, if you're familiar with the campus, there's a pond there. What's the name of that pond?
Now it's University Street, I think. Theta Pond.
Theta Pond, yeah. And today that is University Avenue, I think. It goes right in front of this house. This was a fraternity house, and I didn't know a thing about fraternities, but my folks let me out there one Sunday afternoon about 3 o'clock, and I walked up the sidewalk and knocked on the door and waited there a little bit, and nobody came to the door, so I reached over there, and I remember it had a kind of a tough, what do you call that, a latch, I guess, on this door, and you just pushed it open, and I had my suitcase, and I walked in, and I didn't see a soul. Now this would have been in '47, right after the war, and the veterans are coming back, and I think there had been some veterans, or maybe some female veterans had lived there in that house throughout most of the war, so this was a fraternity, the Sigma Nu fraternity, and they were just getting started up after World War II, and I got there on a Sunday afternoon, and so I remember I walked in and I just looked around and didn't hear a soul. I said, "Anybody home?" And Well, not a voice. So I didn't know what to do. So there was a steps here, so I walked up and walked on the second floor, and it had more steps, and walked up to the third floor. And I looked over all the places there, and then there on the second floor, I saw a room that looked like it was just a nice place. So I walked in, and just like I owned the place, and hung up my clothes. I didn't have many clothes, but hung up, I think I had a suit, one suit, and some kind of just workaday breeches and very plain clothes, hung it up there in the closet, and I just moved in. And so later that day, there were some of these members of the fraternity were coming back in, and they all knew each other, and of course after 2 or 3 of them got there, I got to where I'd try to meet them and say hello and either shake hands or something, and I noticed they were all doing some work. We had we did some real basic work there, and I just chipped in and helped them, just like I owned the place or was at home with them, and we did that about 3 days. And by the time the third day got through there, this house was it was full of people starting to school. These were all what they called members of this fraternity, the Sigma Nu fraternity. And now the Cummings boys, they were older. Some of them had been in the Army, I remember, and none of them showed up there on the day school was about to start. And the one of the Humphreys was, I believe he may have showed up there, or maybe he got there the second or third day. And then he had a younger brother, Bill, who was just a little younger than I, and he got there, well, I don't believe he came, I didn't get acquainted with him till after schooling started, maybe my sophomore year. But anyway, we got the house kind of cleaned up, and then they said, well, now we'll have our rushees will start coming Monday. This would have been about Friday or Saturday. They'll come here in a day or two, and the house was in pretty good shape, and it was, at least the floors were swept, and the windows, we'd washed windows and swept floors and mowed the lawn and did everything you do when you try to take over a big house here that's been used for several years, and then it's been idle for nearly a year, and everybody comes back and does all those things. Well, I didn't know a thing about Rush, but I'd moved in, and when the Rushies, the guests, these freshmen, what happens, these members get in touch with freshmen who start the school there usually in September, and they invite them to what they call Rush Week. I believe that's what we called it. And so we'd have about 10 or 20 guests there for each of the next 2 or 3 days, and we'd just get acquainted with them and And I didn't understand what we were doing really, but I didn't. The word fraternity and sorority. Later, I learned quite a little bit about that, but I didn't understand any of it that day.
Well, why did you decide to come to Stillwater to begin with?
Because we do these
The
Cummings
Humphreys
and
okay.
and Humphrey boys had talked to my folks and told them that they ought to bring me to Oklahoma A&M.
And how did your parents feel about this?
Well, Mother always wanted Glenn and me to go to college and pass, make our grades. I was the first one in her family who had ever gone to college. None of her siblings went to college. She didn't know what college was hardly, but that was the only college students. I hadn't. Now, a few years later, I might have gone to TCU because we were affiliated with the TCU through the Christian church in Booker, Texas. Or I might have gone to Texas Tech. Or I might have gone to a school up in Goodwill, Oklahoma. That was a college. But to answer your question, well, that was really the only college I knew anything about. I felt these 5 guys that I got acquainted with, 3 Cummings, 2 Humphrey, they were big, gung-ho. They had all gone to OSU, and so I decided that was the best college in the continent.
And you lived in the Sigma Nu house to start.
What's that?
You lived in the Sigma Nu house to start.
I did, and I think it's probably, they used to kid a lot about this, but I am the only member of the Sigma Nu chapter, Epsilon, Sigma Nu, and I had a number just like everybody else, but I was the only guy who never went through rush week.
Because you moved in.
I just moved in and took over and acted like I felt right at home.
I think that's wonderful.
Well, there were some of those older Sigma Nu guys, they didn't think it was so wonderful, but the majority was with me, I think.
Your stuff was already hanging up in the closet.
That's right. And then I missed all the blackball procedure, or I'd have probably never made it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your major and your classes. What did you study?
Well, when I started to college, at that time, my father and the grandfather of one of my law partners today, they operated what was known as the Frass Ranch. And that was a ranch that was there in Lipscomb County, and it had about, it must have had 10,000 acres in it. It was the largest ranch. Well, no, that isn't right either. It was a large ranch, and it was all grassland except for about 200 acres. We'd sow a little, try to raise a little row crop or something, and we'd put it in bundles and stack it and feed it to cattle during the winter time. But when I was doing that, Glenn and I, we spent a lot of time riding our horses on the Frass Ranch and helping work the cattle once or twice a year, and manage a ranch. And I thought this is another reason that I was interested about Oklahoma A&M, was because I thought I would probably farm or ranch when I got out of school. And 4 years is a long time, and I continued, every time I was home, we'd be on our horses doing something over at the Frass Ranch.
So did you take a lot of classes in agriculture?
I took at least one or two at first. Seemed like the first year, it was pretty much, we took English and a math course and a history course and something else. And then maybe the second year or the second semester, the first year, I took a course in agriculture, and I made a trip, 2 or 3 trips a week to the agricultural barns there west of Stillwater. And but then I was taking, then I took some of my first classes. There is, I think there's still a building there, Moral Hall. Mm-hmm. Well, that was a nice building when I had my first classes in it. But I had several classes in Moral Hall. This would have been in 47, 48.
Well, we're back with Bob Lemon, and let's pick up. You were telling me about taking some classes in Moral Hall. Now, what did you end up majoring in?
I believe that I had what you call a general business major.
Okay.
And then I had a few courses in that were really more in the School of Agriculture, some of which I've mentioned to you and some of which I've forgotten. But my major was a general business, and later, of course, I went to law school, but I hadn't even thought about that until my father told me one time. I had always thought that I had pretty well given up being a rancher or a farmer. I thought I'd be a banker. And one day he told me, "Robert, I think you'd be a better banker if you had a law degree. Why don't you go to law school?" And so are we on?
We are on, yes. Mm-hmm.
We're on, okay. I drove down to Norman, Oklahoma, and I met the dean, who was a man named Page Keaton. And Dean Keaton gave me a very nice reception, and he had looked at my grades, and he said, "Yes, we'd be delighted to have you here." And so that was a nice interview, and I got ready to go, and I remember I said, "Well, Dean Keaton, I'll see you here in September or August, whatever." And he said, "Well, now if you're going to see me, you're going to have to travel a long way, because September 1 I take over as dean of the law school at the University of Texas." And he didn't really encourage me to go to Texas instead of OU, but I forget what all he said, but it kind of made me think that maybe I should go to law school at Austin, Texas, rather than in Norman, Oklahoma. And I decided I'd talk to my wife. I was married by now. I got married during my senior year at OSU. Got married on the 20th day of December in 1950, and that marriage lasted 52 years and 2 days until Mary Lou died on the 22nd day of December in 2002. Now let's see, what was I?
So you're telling me about consulting with your wife about going to law school in Texas.
Oh, yes. And she really wasn't, she hadn't really thought too much about that either, and we just decided one day, well, we can still be I'll still be a banker, but let's do that. And my parents by this time, I tell you, during the Depression and the Dust Bowl years, we were a poor family. I mean, dirt poor, literally. And but by this time, my father had a job at a bank, and he was getting along very well. And he encouraged us. He said, "I think we can figure out a way to keep you in school somehow," and he encouraged us to do that. So Mary Lou and I thought, well, that'd be kind of unusual. Neither one of us had, I don't think, had ever been to Austin, Texas. But by this time we had a car. And so we drove down to Austin, and we stayed eventually. Well, this was after we had been admitted to the law school down there. We stayed at a half of a duplex. The address was 4716 Harmon Avenue, I think. And that was our home, and that's where Robin's two older brothers were born, were there in that house. It was released from a lady named Mrs. Stenholm, and she talked to us and finally told us what the rent would be, and which we decided we could afford after we had talked to my parents. And so she was a very gracious lady, an older lady, and she was, I guess she had a few other properties there, rental properties, and we learned that by the time Mary Lou was pregnant the second time, that if we had more than one child, why, the rent would go up a little bit. But by that time, why, she thought so much of Mary Lou that she did not charge us any more rent.
Well, I'm gonna pull you back to OSU for a second, and then we'll get back to your law career. So, while you were at OSU and enjoying life in the Sigma Nu house, I'm sure there were some other things you were doing in your spare time. So I wanna talk a little bit about the Flying Aggies, but before we get there, I want you to tell me about your interest in flying and how that developed.
When I was about, there in Booker, we had some very close friends who grew up on ranches and farms south of Booker, and the Mitchells, Harry Mitchell, his family owned a beautiful home right there. We would walk by it every day going to and from school, and he became a good friend, and he one time asked me if I would be interested in going with him. He had been in the Air Force, and he wanted to start giving flight lessons to people in Booker, Texas. So he said that he was going to buy a brand new Piper Cub. I think they called that a J3 maybe, Piper Cub. And this would have been in about 1940.
You were about 12 or 13?
Well, if I was 14, let's see, 14 and 12 and 29, it'd be 41, and it was 14 would have been 43. I was about 15 or maybe 16, because this would have been after he got out of the service at the end of the war. Well, anyway, he said, I'm going to go to some place where they bake Piper Cubs, and that was either in Pennsylvania or in Connecticut, and it seems like to me it was in Connecticut. But he said, I'm going to go up there, and if you're interested, why, you could go with me, and then you could help me fly this Piper Cub back to Texas. So I talked to my father and my mother, and they said, yes, that's okay. Much to my surprise, I might say. But anyhow, this was a kind of a new experience for me. And so Mr. Mitchell and I forget where we got on the train, either at Shattuck, Oklahoma, or up in maybe Kansas someplace. But it took us 3 days to get to the city where Piper Cubs were manufactured. Incidentally, coming back, well, we had a headwind, and it took us longer to fly home in that Piper Cub than it did to ride the train up. It took us 3.5 days to come back, and 3 days going up. Well, we got up and went to the airport there where they had this beautiful Piper Cub, and we got in it and got it started home. And it was a summertime, it was in August, and it was hot everywhere, and it was, you just seemed like you had a headwind every minute of every day. And one day, as we were starting home, as we were on the way home, we were paralleling some highway there, and I think we were getting close to the place where they run the auto races, the 500. Is that in Indiana? Is it Terre Haute or somewhere?
Indianapolis.
Anyhow, we started home. Well, just before we got there, though, we had landed, and it was lunchtime. And Mr. Mitchell asked me, well, what do you want to eat? And I decided I wanted to eat some ice cream. And so he asked me, well, how many dips you want here? And I remember I said, Mr. Mitchell, I'm so hungry, I could eat a quart of that ice cream. So I sat down and you know, very hurriedly, drank or ate ate that ice cream. And here pretty quick then we got in our airplane and took off, and one stretch there we were parallel to a highway, and there was a convoy of Army trucks on this highway, and Mr. Mitchell had, of course, just got out of the service, and he was very interested in it, so we got to doing these S-turns back and forth like this, very low, but it was rough. I mean, that Piper Cub, we'd bounce up and down 500 feet, I think.
And you're in the front seat?
I'm in the front seat, sadly. But anyhow, he's in the back seat. And the Piper Cub, that model Piper Cub, when you got up on the wing here and to get in, the doors didn't, you didn't have doors like this. They opened up like this. You could hook it up here underneath the wing and just fly with the top half of the door down. Bottom half, why, it just stayed here like you're sitting here, and that bottom door would hit you right across here, and top door would be up here like this. Well, we got home and he got to doing these S-turns, so he could just kind of study those, what kind of trucks those were and what they were hauling and so forth, and back and forth and up and down, and temperature about 130, I think, hot. And pretty soon I began to get a little easy, woozy at the stomach, and we kept making those S-turns, and seemed like it's just up and down and up and down, and finally I just vomited all that ice cream. And I was, I just kind of felt better. I haven't been sick in a long time, but I know when you're sick at your stomach, you get you have some tension down here. And then after I got through vomiting, I turned around to look at Mr. Mitchell, and he was white. He was white. And he had just was taking off his glasses, and the only clean place on his face was right around his eyes. Well, that was good, because he needed to see. He was flying that thing. Well, without describing any more of those details.
Well, Bob, I'd like you to tell me a little bit about how the Flying Aggies got started.
Well, okay, and now in telling you this, I'll have to have another embarrassing airplane story. Well, how did the fly? Well, by the time I got to OSU, I was still very interested in flying, and I can't remember for certain where I was when I soloed, but I think I had soloed at the Perryton, Texas airport, but it may have been the Stillwater airport. But it was just about the time I soloed, and I was in school at OSU, and I just loved to fly, and thank heavens I did, because later on it meant so much to me. I never flew for recreational purposes, but strictly for business purposes. But anyway, I was interested in flying, and I would go out to the Stillwater airport, and I got acquainted with a flight instructor there named, and I think his name was Hoyt Walkup. Do you happen to know, is that the correct pronunciation on his name?
Yeah, it was Hoyt Walkup.
Walkup?
Walkup, W-A-L-K-U-P. Walkup.
Last letter is P?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well that's right. And he was just not only a great flight instructor, but for me he was just a great friend. I loved to be with him, and I'd take flight lessons from him. Even after I had soloed, I think I took a few flight lessons from him just to try to learn from him. And he was a good instructor. And I can't remember exactly how the Flying Aggies started, but I kind of think it was just starting the year I was a sophomore at OSU. That would have been in September of '48. And there were several of us who flew a little bit out there. There weren't very many, but Hoyt Walkup was our flight instructor for all of us. I don't remember of the college having another flight instructor at that time, but it had some airplanes, and if we wanted to fly, after we could fly solo, if we wanted to just log some time, why, it was relatively inexpensive to do so, and we thought we ought to have a group name, and we started the Flying Aggies was just a natural, because the name of the college at that time was Oklahoma, either just A&M or Agricultural and Mechanical College. But we developed the name the Flying Aggies, and we kind of made an organization out of it, and I can't even remember how many. I don't think we had over a dozen members in 1948, although it may have been more than that. Well, one day I had been flying around, and I came in, and it was one of those hot days in the fall, and
First, didn't you decide to have a safety chair?
well, yes, we did.
Before?
And I think maybe I was supposed to help write up some rules, safety rules, for our group that we were just starting up. And that's right. And I kind of was acting as a chairman of that group, and just kind of keeping notes of what we talked about, and rules we ought to have, and just trying to think of anything we could to make flying safer. Well, I came in one day and taxied up to the gas pump there on the, what do we call that? Is that the tarmac?
Mm-hmm.
And stopped, and there wasn't a soul in sight, and I was alone, but I decided I'd go ahead. We always tried to fill up our airplanes before we put them away, to keep if you didn't do that, well, you had more air in there, and then the air could dense, and you got a little bit of water, and it just was bad flying practice. That's something, as long as I flew, I'd always fill up just as soon as I finish the trip. So I got out, and there wasn't anybody to help me, and I
Broke a rule.
well, yes. The first thing, we were always supposed to have some chucks. What do we call those?
Chocks.
Chucks. And then, of course, you always had somebody to help you in the airplane.
Another rule.
Yes, I was alone. And then let's see, what do we do next? This was an airplane. This is one of the old tail draggers. It was a Cessna, I'm pretty sure, and probably a two-place Cessna. I'm not sure about that. And it didn't have a starter. And later on, why airplanes had starters, but not this one. So I got the gas tank filled up, and I'm ready to start.
To pull the prop.
And that was the next thing I had to do, and I did try to set my brakes, but these brakes must have been pretty well shot, because then I got around and
And it's a hot day.
yeah, it's a hot day, and the engine was still hot, and I was thinking that I'd pull it through 2 or 3 times, and then usually you had to do that to start an airplane.
And have plenty of time to get back to the...
Yes, and so I got around in front, and I just barely moved that propeller about this far, and boy, it took off. Well, oh, another thing, I don't remember we even had a rule on this, but I thought I had set my brakes, and I thought I had set my throttle to where it would keep it going while I ran from around in front of the airplane, got in, and taxied back to the hangar. Well, that old airplane, I just barely moved that prop, and boy, it took off, and I had set the throttle a little stout. Later, while they were discussing this, and they said I must have had it set up around 2100, and which is pretty good, pretty fast. And that airplane started moving. Now, it didn't have a pilot, and
No brakes.
what?
No brakes, no chocks.
No, that's right.
Lots of fuel.
And a tank full of fuel.
So what happened to the plane?
Yeah,
Well,
Mr. Safety
that's the
Chair.
interesting part here. As I couldn't, those Cessnas have those, what do you call those?
Struts.
Struts or
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wing struts.
wing struts. And I couldn't get in to grab the throttle, and all I could do was grab the tail as it went by. And so here I am. I've got my arm around the tail of this, how do you describe that area, right in front of the tail, that horizontal tail and the end of the fuselage.
Mm-hmm. Just the tail section and the empennage.
Well, that was back there, and
Hold
I
her
was
on her.
trying to keep my legs in front of me so I could stop it. Well, it wasn't that wasn't that easy, and I soon learned there that I needed to keep it kind of going in a circle, or it was just going to pull me out in the pasture.
It was going to hit the gas tank.
What?
You also thought it might hit the gas pump.
Oh, that was what the first thing, the first circle. I made damn sure I missed that gas pump, and then my circles were getting larger all the time
And faster.
and faster.
He's getting
Yes,
faster.
and then the next one I came around. I missed the gas pumps again, and now I'm looking for some open country here because I'm about ready to let that baby go. And I just as I was getting around and missing that gas pump the third time, there was an airport manager who was in his office or in a point there in the office where he could see what was going on, and he could tell that I was in distress. And his name, I think, was Rucker, Mr. Rucker. He wasn't a flyer, but he could tell when a flyer was needing some assistance that he could give. And he ran out, and just as I'm coming around the third time, he risked his life a little bit to get around and come in and behind that flight strut and open the door and reach for the throttle, and thank God he found it. He didn't know that much about airplanes. He knew where the throttle was. And so he was also helping me slow down. I don't know how fast I was going, but I'm pretty sure I was breaking some speed limit. And so he never said a word. He just said, "Bob, here's your plane." And he walked back to the office, and I taxied to the hangar and put it up and hoped nobody saw it besides him, and got in my car and went back to the Sigma Nu house and took a nap, I think.
And how did becoming the safety chair go for you?
Well, I got a lot of kids. I remember, guys like to make fun of one another.
Sure.
And a few times at meetings, even after I had been elected to an office in the Flying Aggies, well, they might introduce me as our safety chairman.
Well, let's talk about how the group was structured and the offices that were established.
Well, I know we had a president and a vice president and a secretary and a treasurer, and I'm sure we had a safety chairman.
Okay. And I heard you were elected the first president, is that correct?
That's right.
And how did that come about?
I can't remember whether it came about before or after my airport incident. It probably came about before. But I think, honestly, it did come about before. And I was elected.
He was a one-termer.
President. Yes, I just got one term. And of course, there wasn't any salaries. Nobody drew any salaries. That wasn't even the purpose of it.
What was your role as president? What would you do?
As president?
Sure.
Well, I'd simply decide when our next meeting was going to happen, and I can't remember. It seemed to me like we simply called, and we may have had some of us kind of take turns doing the calling and get word to all our members. And we always tried to recruit new members, especially where we had someone who came to the airport for any reason. I remember later I had 2 sons in school over there at the same time, and by that time I was flying in a lot of times, and they would be out there to meet me, or leave a car out there or something. But for an organization like that, we just did a lot of the work that organizations have to do to exist.
Would you have dues? Member dues?
Oh, I'm sure we did, yes. But I'm sure they were very small.
Bob, can I ask, what was the purpose of the club? Why was the club formed?
Well, we were all students at Oklahoma State, and we had an interest in flying, and we had an interest in flying safely. We always stressed safety. Yes, that was kind of a...
It's a good thing.
What?
I guess it's a good thing. It was needed.
And later, we were just beginning to get in. Do they still, John, do they still drop items?
Well, tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about that process.
Well, you know, that was just starting about the time I was leaving OSU.
So you were president in your junior or senior year?
It probably would have been my, well, either one of those. No, it'd been a sophomore or junior. Might have been the end of my sophomore year, or the beginning of my junior year.
So the dropping of the stuff out of the airplane, can you walk me through that? I know nothing. Pretend I don't know anything about it.
Well, I don't even remember what was in those sacks, but we just, when I was involved with it, we just would open an airplane door while you were flying. You always had to have 2 people in the airplane to do that. That was one rule, and I'm sure we followed it. I guess we did, unless we were in a hurry. But you had a sack of something that was fairly heavy, and you'd just drop it like you would a bomb. And you had to be so many feet high, and they wouldn't let you get too low, and you dropped it, and they had markers there on the runway, so you could tell pretty quick and you always tried to hit the line. I forget what we call that, but you'd miss it 10 feet or 10 yards or half a mile or whatever. And every time you made a drop, why, this was something that it might have just been a sack of some dirt in it. And you could get rid of it after each drop, keep your runway clean.
Was this just a competition that you did as club members? Just something fun to do? The bomb drop?
Well, yes, we'd have a contest, and you had so many drops. It seemed to be like maybe we each did 3 drops. And it also seems like we charged a few dollars to enter this contest, and then you keep track each time how many feet. You always it seems like if you hit on the downwind side of this line, you were disqualified. I wonder if they still do that.
Now it's just closest to the target now, regardless.
Okay, well I think at one time we required that if you didn't get, that's like we called that the end of the runway.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't get to the end of the runway, you just disqualified. In fact, I'm pretty sure that was the way we did that. Because we wanted fellas to we wanted them to stay close to the line, but we damn sure didn't want them to drive out here in pastures or someplace.
So that was just all Aggies or whoever wanted to come out and fly and do that? There wasn't other schools here then?
It'd just be Flying Aggie members.
Yeah, right.
Were in
Okay.
the contest.
Okay.
That's right. And we had kind of advertised it a little bit
Sure.
about these drops, because you always have some students who have some interest in flying and airplanes, and I think we probably drummed up quite a little interest among students, because we'd have sometimes we had those drops, we'd have several, maybe I don't know, maybe 100 students out there just watching.
How long were you president? When did you quit
Just a
being
year.
active? 1 year?
1 year.
Okay. Did you stay active with the Flying Aggies after that?
I did as long, well, I did it as long as I was in school, and I think, let's see, I probably was inactive when I was down in law school in Austin, Texas. But in 54, I got back, and I'm pretty sure I started being a member of Flying Aggies and maybe attending a few of their meetings, because it was no trick at all to fly from where I lived. Mary Lou and I used to drive it a lot, and it was a 5-hour drive, but you could fly it in an hour and 10 minutes maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Do you remember some of the other officers that were in the club with you, or were there others Flying Aggies who you can think of that were successful and did things out there in the real world? Do you recall any of those people?
God, I used to name off 50 or a bunch of them, because I knew all of them.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm 85 years old, and I've had a little health problem a time or two, and it just destroyed some of my memory. And I really think, just a minute, surely Hoyt Walkup, I remember him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does he still live?
No. No, Hoyt passed away several years ago.
Well, he was a class act.
Yeah.
He used to make some trips to Guyman, Oklahoma, and if he had room, why, he'd call me a time or two and ask if I wanted to fly with him, and a few times I did.
If we go back just a little bit, Hoyt was the inspiration for you starting the Flying Aggies?
Oh, I think so. I think so. I would definitely say that. Yeah, that's true. We surely had a faculty advisor. People just kind of hold the same role you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure he was our faculty advisor. it was now the only two people I knew was he, and I got better acquainted with Mr. Rucker later on after he caught my runaway airplane that day. But he was really the only two adults that I knew very much about. If my brother were living today, why, Glenn could probably tell you his name, and he could. Now I don't think Glenn was a Flying Aggie. I can't remember. He flew, and he had flown to. He made a jillion trips to Stillwater, and he had flown to Stillwater the day before he made a trip, flew to Colorado, and on the way home that night he landed at Liberal, Kansas, and let out a passenger, and then took off and lost an engine on a Cessna 310 and crashed and burned and killed him.
Mm.
November 5, 1986. But he was the first out-of-state president of the alumni, I believe. OSU what do we have? Alumni
Association.
Mm-hmm.
Association.
Yeah.
I think he was the first out-of-state president of that.
How many Aggies did you say were in the club during your time there? Total number?
Well, I'm going to guess that there was, we might have got up to 40 or 50, but I'm sure it wasn't more than that, and it might not have been that high yet.
Yeah.
How many do you have now?
We have about 90. About 90 right now, today, in the club.
Well, how many of them are active in your flight program where you engage in?
All of them.
All of them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've got about 300 and some total students in the flight program, and about 90 of those are Aggies, Flying Aggies.
Well, I think that flight club performs a vital role
Mm-hmm.
in student flying, and I would imagine that there's going to be a few of those 90 members who would tell you that the Flying Aggies had some part in them taking up flying. How do we still do? A lot of our graduates, do they get into commercial flying or?
Yeah, that's the only reason they're there, is the academic program of flying to become a pro pilot. So most of them that's their goal orientation, is to become a commercial pilot in some regard, either for the airlines or in corporate.
Glenn and I were both pilots, and then of course my wife became a pilot after the FAA yanked my flying license. But Glenn, he flew. He was president of the Texas Bankers Association,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the largest bankers association group in the United States, except the American bankers.
Were you aware of any other student organizations prior to joining the Flying Aggies? Were there any other flying organizations in the university that you were aware of?
doe.
Okay.
Do you have any others now?
No?
Well, there sure wasn't back before I got there.
Can you tell me, just tell me a little bit about, as you look back on your years with the Flying Aggies, did being involved and serving as president, how did that impact your life after college? Being a member of a group like that.
Well, it really got me totally interested in flying, and that was so important to my business. I'm a lawyer, and after I finished at the University of Texas, I turned down some good jobs. I could have gone with firms in Houston and in Dallas that still exist, and
New York.
New York. Yes, I had a good opportunity with a big law firm in New York, and one of the factors that Mary Lou and I decided on in going to Perryton was, there were several reasons why we were there, but one of them was that while we could tell then that we were going to be traveling a lot to places like Oklahoma City and of course Stillwater to see some athletic events and maybe take some clients with us, which we nearly always did. And then we did a lot of other flying. Glenn and I were in banking, and we wanted to make loans in other states besides other areas besides Perryton and Booker, and it made it possible for us to do that. We could fly to. We organized a group that our bank couldn't make loans outside of the state of Texas, and we wanted to have somehow to make loans for businesses in Oklahoma, Kansas, and at that time New Mexico, Colorado. We still have interest together in Colorado, and you just can't do all that and drive a car, but you can if you fly. And we always had one or two airplanes that we had enough travel. Gosh, I don't have any idea how many trips we made to Wichita, Kansas. And if you drove up there and transacted your business and drive home, you're up from early in the morning till late at night. And a lot of times we had enough business in lending money to cattle in feedlots. That was the beginning of the feedlot era out there. And we had enough of that loan paper to take to the Federal Land Bank in Wichita, and they had beat us at the airport, and we'd bring back the money, you might say. We could close deals and get those notes sold to the Federal Land Bank, and we could just, it made us possible for customers to come in the bank in Booker, little bank, but it grew to over $100 million on deposits, and it had a trust department that did that much or more, and it had the subsidiary that did the cattle landing all up north in the feedlots. Why, that had business in Wichita every day, and it justified the expense of flying.
Certainly. If you had one piece of advice to give to the Flying Aggie students today, what would you say to them?
I'd tell them to always address safety regulations carefully and study them and practice them and really try to do everything, as we used to say, according to Hoyle. I don't know who Hoyle was, but that's we sure watched that. And in among our friends and family, the only loss we've ever had was my brother. But I've flown across the Rocky Mountains several times a month for 21 years. I fly to Deming, New Mexico, where I made a mistake. I went out there with a client one time, and he got ready to buy some land, and he said, "Bob, this deal's too big for me, but it's a good deal, and you want half of it?" And I said yes instead of no. No would have been the better answer. But the first thing you know, I had to buy him out. I later took bankruptcy over that deal, but all the way I flew until, Robin, when was it that I flew to Colorado Springs with all you children and my mother?
In the summer of 1964.
Was that early?
In June of 64. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I got up there, and I've been a diabetic forever, and once in a while, diabetics, you don't manage your system right, and when you don't manage it, it manages you. So about an hour after I got up there that day, I fainted.
He flew us up there.
What?
You had been the pilot. You flew us up there and
Yeah.
got out of the plane and fainted.
Would you say, did that happen there at the airport?
Not at the airport, in the car leaving the airport.
Oh.
As we approached
It was a bad deal. Anyway, and my mother, she
low blood sugar
notified the
insulin reaction.
FAA because she knew that just getting out of that airplane and all that was not a good thing. So then about a week later, I got a nice letter from the FAA, and they told me that a review of my record, cause they didn't tell me what it was, but I knew that you're no longer authorized to fly as a private pilot, and if you can contest this action by filing an appeal with the FAA. But I never filed it. I quit flying. But then my wife, this lady for whom this airplane is named after, and say, now I don't want to forget that. I'm very interested in having that airplane show up in Texas next year. I might even ride in with it. And how many passenger? Is it just a two-seater?
It's a Cessna 150 two-place.
Yeah,
and
the college.
Not all that dissimilar from the one you did the loop-de-loops with on the ground.
You could ride on the tail.
him grabbing over his tail.
You're going to see it as soon as I get the sticker on the plane. You're going to see it because we're going to bring it down here to show it to you.
Well, Bob, throughout our interview today, you've been telling us a little bit about your wife, but I want you to tell me more about your wife. So tell me, we know you met her when you were younger, so just share a little bit more about her with us.
Mary Lou Smith, her parents and her older brother moved to a Phillips camp. Her father had worked for the Phillips Pipeline Company a long time, and he had a pretty good job, and he moved to a Phillips camp about halfway between Booker and Derazette, Texas. And she happened to decide to start the high school in Booker, Texas. They had moved down there. Mary Lou grew up and started his first grade at a little school called Sharp, Kansas. And she and I was there one time, and the little one-room schoolhouse still exists. But then her parents had somehow moved, and she went to high school at least her freshman year in Burlington, Kansas. And she was a beautiful young woman, and she had a boyfriend there. And one time not too long after she had moved to the Booker area, well, he had even come down to visit her and see her, and I got to meet him. I was introduced to him, and he was a nice fella. But that was the last time he came back. And by this time, she and I, as sophomores, we dated rarely, and as juniors frequently, and as seniors constantly. And the first time I ever met her was on a class picnic on a September day. We met, there was an area there southeast of Perryton and almost, well, about southwest of Booker, about 25 miles, called Lake Fryer. And our class had a picnic down there at the beginning of school, and there, that's where I was introduced to Mary Lou, and I never will forget. We had a mutual friend named Wilda Ray Marshall, and she was also be a sophomore in the Booker High School that fall, and she introduced us, and I remember Mary Lou just coming over and kind of putting out her hand and said, "My name is Mary Lou Smith." And I was kind of embarrassed at the time, and I couldn't think what would be appropriate, and all I could say was, "My name is Robert Dale Lemon." And we used to laugh a lot about that, but she was a good student, and at first just a kind of a good friend, and then we started dating a lot, and we just had an excellent relationship. In fact, she had to drop out of college. She started to college at Oklahoma Panhandle State University at Goodwill. And she was a very popular young woman on the campus and took part in a lot of activities, one of which was singing. She was always a great pianist, and she was a great singing, and she enrolled in a musical class, and they learned, what's that Christmas song that she learned? And
The cantata, you mean, or
what?
the Messiah?
The Messiah, yeah. And she knew every word of that backwards and forwards, and then when we, a little later, why that song would be sung and parroted each year at Christmas time. And I think that's still a tradition, but it grew a lot during the years that she was involved, because it got so big that at first they used to hold it in the Methodist church, and then for a decade or maybe 2 decades they moved it to the high school auditorium, and they'd just about fill it every year. And she was one of the head honchos of that, to help raise the money and we even, it got so big that they, rather than trying to just use local musicians, they'd hire several from Amarillo, and they would drive up there on that Sunday evening and rehearse and then sing the Messiah. And that was a big part of our lives for a long time. And then she went to college at Panhandle, and at the time she told me she wanted to drop out of school because she thought her grades would improve. And I never thought anything about that, and she went to work in a newspaper office in Booker, and she worked there a little bit, and then she got a good job working as a sort of a secretary or something for the Booker Equity. That was one of these outfits that build these concrete elevators, round concrete elevators, and they were a big firm, and they paid some nice salaries, and she had a good job, went to work there and worked there a short time. They gave her a nice raise, and she could practically run that place. And she worked there, and while then she got to where she was just constantly on the road, driving out to her home at the Phillips plant there east of Booker, about 8 miles. And so my grandfather had died while Mary Lou and I were in Austin, and so she stayed with my grandmother, and I never did know exactly what the economics of that transaction were. In fact, I didn't know she was going to do that until she was moved in. But my father had set that up, and I've always assumed she probably didn't pay anything, because we were so thrilled to have her there, just to kind of check on grandmother of a morning and an evening, and that worked out that way as long as Mary Lou was single.
And you eventually found out why she didn't go back to school, really?
Oh, yes. She didn't go back to school at Panhandle because her parents couldn't afford to send her. And but she never admitted that, or I never said that.
Well, y'all married while you were still in college. How did that come about?
Well, we let's see. I was a senior, and she was she had been out of school a couple of years, and I was every time the Segment News had any kind of a social event, they'd have at least 2 big ones a year. Why, I'd drive out and pick her up and bring her back, and get her a room there at the student union, and that went on a while, and then we just, we were, I was, let's see, I was 21, and she was 21.
And didn't you fly her to Dalhart and get her some new boots?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. While we were seniors, we, one time, we lived there in the cattle country, and we decided we needed a pair of twin boots. And so we'd have to have them made. And the only bootmaker that I knew anything about was at Dalhart, Texas. That is about 150 miles straight west of Perryton. So we flew out there and had our, they took our measurements, and the fella said, well, I'll come back in about 6 weeks and I'll have your boots made for you. So we flew home, and then I called him and asked him about the boots, and he said, yes sir, you can pick them up any time, and we set a date, and we flew out to Dalhart and bought our boots, and we went, I said, well, how much we owe you? I was afraid it's going to be quite a little, because handmade boots in that economy of that day, those were pretty expensive. These were good looking, what were they made out of? Alligator hide, or?
I don't know. Maybe yes, I think they were.
They were kind of expensive boots, and so we flew out to get them, and asked him how much. He said, well, Bob, I'm just going to give you those. He said, I never had a couple fly in from anywhere and order and then pick up their boots. And I just give these, of course, I think he kind of liked Mary Lou by that time too. She was easy to get along with. And so that's one trip we took.
Well, tell me a little bit about your children.
Well, Mary Lou and I while we were in law school, we had 2 children, Dell and Jim. Dell lives in Austin, Texas today, and he keeps telling us that his wife is also an OSU graduate. Dell is an OSU graduate, and they used to talk about moving back to Stillwater sometime, but I don't think that'll ever happen. Jim is my second son, and he's an OSU graduate, and they both lived at 913 University Avenue, and he now works for what's the name of that corporation?
United Technologies.
Yeah, it's a large corporation, and he's been working with them, gosh,
About 30 years.
long time, and he gets back to both of those guys. Dale will be up here this coming weekend for the Texas game, but he and I are both solid OSU fans, even though I went to school at Texas, and he lives there with those Longhorns. Let's see.
You have two more.
Oh, and then I have two more children, one of whom is here. So I have to be real careful what I say. But Robin has a twin brother named Chris. And Chris, he didn't go to OSU because he had an appointment to the Air Force Academy at Colorado Springs, which he accepted, and he graduated there 4 years later with honors, and then he went into the Air Force, and he served in the Air Force. How many years?
Well, he became a pilot and an instructor. He instructed. He was an instructor.
That's right. He, after he finished the Air Force Academy, he became a flight instructor, and he was stationed at Vance Air Base in Enid, Oklahoma. And at that time, Robin was in college at Phillips University in Enid, Oklahoma, and that later became Phillips Theological Seminary. But Chris, he taught flight instructing for how many years?
5 or 6.
5 or 6 years.
And then became an attorney.
Oh yes, and he decided at that time that he didn't want to, as he put it, the rest of his life looking at horizons. So he withdrew from the Air Force and enrolled in law school at American University in Washington, D.C. And today he's a practicing lawyer in Washington, D.C.
And then you adopted an adult child.
He what?
And you adopted an adult child, Moki.
Oh, my God, yes. And he's the one that we're so concerned about. He's going to be about 50. He's a Muskogee Creek Indian. And he lived in California for a number of years, and he lived with a man named Robert, that Mayo.
He was a friend of Robert's.
He was a friend of Robert Mayo, and Robert Mayo was a gay man, and he grew up. Now this all happened back in the 1950s, when a lot of people looked differently at the gay people. What today we call that the LGBT community. And Robert Mayo was a gay man, and there was so much, and his family owned a large ranch in Beaver County, Texas. Was his name Mayo, or I believe it was. And he was Robert Mayo was he a scientist, or he was some professional man? He might have been a teacher. But the hatred against homosexuals back in 1950 was so strong in Beaver County that although he had built a nice home on this ranch that lies there on the Beaver River, about 12 or 15 miles east of Beaver. And his mother also, well anyhow, he had to leave that area.
He moved to California and he met Moki, and they all had a lot of friends and fun together, and the AIDS epidemic hit and Robert died, and Moki came out to your law firm where Robert's estate was being probated, and Moki became acquainted with Mother and you at your law firm, and eventually he was adopted into our family symbolically,
Right.
and now lives in Tulsa where he's quite ill, but just this month was inducted into the Creek Hall of Fame.
The Muskogee Creek Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very big honor for a fellow like him. But we were there for that event, and that was a big deal.
Yeah, and something we haven't talked a whole lot about today has been your work with diversity and equality and social justice. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yes. Mary Lou and I became involved with the gay community. God, so many years ago. I can't remember exactly.
Probably in the 70s.
Oh, before that? Well, I'll tell you what it was. The Stonewall event in New York City was in about '69. You're right. And it was about '69, and we had actually been to some extent involved before that time, before that event. But that really got us interested in it, and we started supporting events in Oklahoma like the Gay Pride Parade here in Oklahoma City each year. We support that in several different ways, and still do, and always will. Mary Lou was a champion for the gay community. You ought to be taking her. It's a shame she's not alive, so she can tell you firsthand of things that she did. There was a fella in Perryton, Texas, named Donnie Anderson, was that his name? That was it, wasn't it? And Mary Lou was a humanitarian, and Johnny Anderson, Donnie Anderson, just had one friend in Perryton, Texas, and it was Mary Lou Levitt. She saw to it that he had something to eat. And she saw to it that he had clothes he could wear, because she was his own. Well, she and but she was much more active than I was. In fact, one time I came home from work at the office there in Perryton, and about 5:30 one evening, and when I got there, she was giving Donnie Anderson a bath in our bathtub. And later we were talking about that, and she said, "Bob, I'll bet he hadn't had a bath in a year, and he needed one." So she just gave him one. And there was another time that we were on a trip to Amarillo. I always had a bad habit of saying something about what is our situation. What do we favor? I always like to use that word, we. And we were on our way to Amarillo one morning, and we crossed, there's a place right there east of Pampa, Texas, on Highway 40, I believe. And you cross the railroad track, and then you kind of pull up here, and you can make a taxi stop and check, and then pull up on the highway. And off to the right here, just kind of down low, just right after you cross the railroad, before you cross the highway, well, there was this fella sitting in a wheelchair with no, he'd lost his legs below the knee, sitting there in a wheelchair. And I saw him, but I just kind of made my usual taxi stop, kind of, and pulled up on the highway, and I'm just turning east to head to Amarillo, and Mary Lou says, well, what are we going to do? And I didn't answer. I just did a 180 and went back, and we turned around and pulled up with this gentleman and got off, and we asked him where he was going. Well, he was going to Hereford, Texas. That's a city about 40, 50 miles southwest of Amarillo. And we had told him we were going to Amarillo, and he said, well, yes, I could ride with you. He says, if I could get to Amarillo, I'll have a ride on into Hereford. They're supposed to come in later today sometime and pick him up. So we did that, and that worked out very well. We finally got his wheelchair loaded in the trunk of the car, and got him loaded in the back seat, and we got him to his motel, and got him unloaded and in his wheelchair, and we put him there in the office and where he wanted to go, and Mary Lou told him, he said, now we'll check here before we go home this evening. We had planned to leave till about 5, and we'll check and see if your ride came. Well, we did, and we checked it, and his ride had come, and he was, as far as we know, he made it on to Hereford, Texas. But that is just what kind of a person she was. And of course, I'm proud of that, and all of my children are proud of it. And we've people who need help, and people in the gay community, they have needed help for decades, and they're even today. Just this week, here in let's see now, we're in Oklahoma City. We've traveled lots around here today. But
some of those places.
the federal courts handed down a ruling either this day or today or recently that made it possible for same-sex people to be married. And they do that now in Oklahoma, but it took a federal lawsuit to make that possible. Mary Lou, after my deal that I kind of got off on a while ago, after the FAA dismissed me as a private pilot, Mary Lou started taking flight lessons, and she she became a private pilot, and she was an unusual person.
She didn't tell you that she was taking lessons.
No, she didn't do that. She was a private person. She was living up to her reputation. And then one day, why, she informed me that we were back in the airplane business. And
Were you shocked?
I was, yes, totally surprised. And but we did that then for another many years.
Should you tell them about her one most fun flight?
She had a good friend named Roselle Wilson, who was related to the lady who had, to Wilda Ray Marshall Wilson, who had introduced us down at Lake Fryer. And her name was Roselle. And Mary Lou and Roselle were very good friends. We had a book club, and Roselle was one of the members in it, and she was just a good friend. One morning, Mary Lou called her and said, "Rosie, what are you doing tomorrow?" And Roselle said, "Well, nothing. I'm just here on the farm." And Mary Lou told her, said, "Well, why don't you come in and we'll make a trip together tomorrow?" And so Roselle was also, was she a pilot or just had flown a lot?
She was a pilot.
I think she was a
rode
pilot.
motorcycles.
So she said, "Sure, I'll see you at 9 o'clock." So they drove to the airport and got in the airplane and took off and flown a few minutes there, probably 50 or 75 miles northwest of Perryton. And Roselle said, "By the way, where are we going?" And I don't think Mary Lou, well, I don't think Mary Lou ever told her. I think Mary Lou, we always filed a flight plan. And Mary Lou, I think, had filed her flight plan for this trip she was going to take Roselle on. And anyhow, the long, make that story a little shorter, they flew to Colorado Springs, which was quite a trip, even in an airplane. And I didn't know about that until Mary Lou had died, and in her obituary, one of her sons, and I think Dale had put that in there, and he had written it up. He said, "So Mary Lou and Roselle flew to Peterson Field in Colorado Springs, got a cab, drove into the Golden Bee." This was this nightclub that we always patronize every time we're up there.
At the Broadmoor.
And
Yeah.
and it says they took a cab to the Golden Bee and drank a yard of ale and flew back to Texas. And when I read that, I was first of all amazed that it had happened, and second, I made Dale change that yard of ale to glass of ale. Something about a yard of ale. That's the way you order it. If you go into some Irish pub today, at least in the Golden Bee, you could get this deal about so long, and there's enough ale in it for 2 people, I'm sure.
Better if you're not going to go fly an airplane.
Well, you've been very supportive of Oklahoma State through many different avenues through the years. And I'd like you to share and talk about some of these efforts from some of the professorships you've established. We know you're very supportive of the Flying Aggies, also some scholarships. Can you just share a little bit about what you've been doing at OSU?
Well, I've said a lot of times I wish I were a wealthy man. I have made a few gifts, but my gifts do not have near as many zeros in them as T. Boone Pickens' gifts. His gifts to OSU have lots of zeros out here.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the importance of giving back.
Of what?
The importance of giving back. So why do you feel compelled to give back to OSU?
4 of the best years of my life were spent at OSU as a college student. I joined a lot of. That was probably a fault, but we used to have an organization called Hellhounds, and that was a Greek support. We supported athletics and kind of a pep club here for athletics. And I joined the organizations like that, but later on I finally got out and started practicing law and had some good fortune. Some of it was in Oklahoma, most of it was in Texas, but made some money, and Mary Lou and I could make some gifts, and she, I don't have any idea how many times we would drive the 5 hours from Perryton, Texas to Stillwater and see a football or a basketball or a baseball or a wrestling match, and then 5 hours back. And we did that a lot of times, and I just decided that I felt that people who are lucky enough to go to college, and as lucky as I was, and to be able to do the things that I was able to do, and that Glenn and my brother later joined me and was later to do. I got acquainted with the people in the arts and science department, particularly, and I just decided that as I could, I'd try to make some gifts that would help other people go to college. And I sort of established one, I forget what exactly the name of it, but in honor of Mary Lou. And then in my brother Glenn, I set up some something that would be receptive of gifts that I make through the Oklahoma State University Foundation, and would help others in the form of scholarships, and then also sometimes as scholarships to enable the university to really get some top-notch instructors.
You know, often when we talk with alumni, we notice this loyalty. What is it about OSU that's special to you?
Oh my gracious, I could talk all day about that. What was our are any of you familiar with Henry Bennett,
Mm-hmm.
who was president of OSU in, at least for a few years there in the 40s. And he died in an airplane crash on his way to Ethiopia. Is that it?
Iran. He was leaving Iran, I believe, as part of the .4 program.
Point 4, that's it. And he was active in the .4 program that had been started under, I think, maybe Truman. Or President Truman. And that was it wasn't that really for the purpose of going to this far-off country just to try to help teach people how to raise at least enough food for themselves. Was that what point 4 was about? And I think that was what Henry Bennett's job was. He was going over there sort of as an ambassador for the point 4 program to get it up and going into helping the people of Ethiopia grow food at least for themselves.
Right.
And that impressed me. Here was a man who, God, he didn't have to do that. All he had to do was run a state university there in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Just live a comfortable life. But he wasn't content. And I think that's, that, I never have said very much about it, but that had a lot of influence on me. I respected Dr. Bennett as a college administrator, just like I respect Burns Hargis today. But Henry Bennett, he was a man I never met, never got to know him, but now I wish I had him.
Great impact.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, we've only scratched the surface, Mr. Lemon, with you today. I hope you understand this after almost 3 hours. But is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we close out? Anything? I know we've barely touched upon your career in law, and we've only touched upon your family and your impact on the university. But is there anything else you'd like to share before we close out today?
Well, I'll be honest with you, I wish I could somehow become a wealthy man. Because I think that, I know young people are influenced by high school. But I think young minds are really influenced by colleges, and I think that today you look at Oklahoma State and you look at Burns Hargis and what he's advocating for. Just frequently I'll read something that Oklahoma State has, they're doing in the research of some type of research just to make people's lives better. Why, they're doing that, and they're training young men and women to not only want to just come out and take care of themselves, but to try to do something for other people. And they were doing that in the days of Henry Bennett, and I think they've been at it ever since. And from just the stories I read occasionally about what the university, what ours, and I always like to when I'm talking with my family about the little school over at Stillwater, or something about our little school over at Stillwater. And that little school was founded in 1890, and it's done a lot of good for a lot of people, and and it's still at it. I don't care whether they're teaching them to fly, so that some of them will wind up as pilots of commercial airliners and really make huge contributions in that way, but in so many other ways.
Well, we definitely appreciate your passion for the university and all you do, and I think we could all echo that here.